I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have started this company if I listened, frankly, to anyone. Innovation inherently is going to meet a lot of naysayers and a lot of criticism.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. I want to start off this week's episode acknowledging last week's, the 100th episode. The amount of feedback and the response has been overwhelming for me. And all I can say is how grateful I am to hear from you. The numbers show it. It's the top performing episode we've had. It's very humbling to me to know that by sharing my story about going through such a humbling season has resonated so much with you. So thank you. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for listening and for reaching out to me. I have plenty more to share, so that won't be the end of that style of show and format. So you can look forward to more stories and lessons in effort to hopefully leapfrog my lessons and accelerate your process of learning as well. Today's guest is Julia Cheek, and I took more notes interviewing and listening to Julia than anyone I've ever interviewed. No BS, I literally have all the notes I could show you. I also have gone back and listened to this and taken more notes. It's that valuable. I really appreciate the fact that Julia has been able to condense a mini MBA into one short episode. So definitely get ready to take some notes. Julia is the founder of EverlyWell, which I first learned about while watching Shark Tank, cozied up on a Sunday night, as I do, watching Shark Tank. And I remember watching the episode the first time. I was very impressed with Julia and very impressed with her business concept. And then it was months and months later that our paths crossed through a mutual friend introducing us, Kenny Tomlin, who has also been on this show. We ended up connecting, and I was able to learn so much from Julia and learn so much about her that I think you will really appreciate too. For all of you who are trying to decide whether or not you want to make a leap from something that's maybe not even a bad situation, it could be a really good situation, but you just know it's not your life work. That's where Julia comes from, that spot. And she talks about being in that situation and having to kind of untangle and figure out how to navigate that leap. There was a point where she actually said, I had to decide, should I dabble any longer? Because there's no more dabbling. I have to take the leap. And I know a lot of you are in this similar spot. So this will be very valuable. Julia does have her MBA from Harvard, and she entered into an industry that she really didn't know much about, and that is the healthcare industry. She's completely disrupting things that are happening in this industry, which is not an easy thing to do, especially when that's not your background. Julie talks about the fact that she wouldn't even be here if she had listened to anyone. It got to that point to where she had to really filter the criticism and who she listened to. She's now raised over $5 million in venture capital, which is something Very few female entrepreneurs have done. Hopefully there will be a lot more, and Julia's just paving the way. And she continues to see great success and major strides with her company, EverlyWell. Her vision is to make healthcare services like lab testing more accessible. She's democratizing this world, and she's making it more simple and meaningful for consumers. So how is she doing this? She's doing it with lab testing kits that are literally delivered to your home. So complete innovation, complete disruption. This has not been done before. Julia's doing it with her team. I'm a proud customer. I think what you'll really appreciate about listening to Julia's path is that she's able to articulate how she navigated challenges in a way that very few can, to where you get these specific examples that you can literally go apply to your own challenge. There were times when, of course, this daunting task of innovating an industry was potentially overwhelming. She talks through literally what she would do if that feeling started to approach. You will hear everything from time management tips from Julia. She takes 0 outside meetings unless they contribute to her company's goals. You will hear a lot of different tangible, tactical tips, which you know we like on this show. Right out of the gate, Julia talks about how difficult it was to quit her previous role. Again, I know many of you can relate. So in order to start something new, eventually we do have to let some things go just to have that space. For anyone who may be thinking, as you're listening to this conversation, well, I don't have my MBA from Harvard. I can't do that. Or that just seems unattainable. I am not going to accept that as an excuse. I also don't have my MBA from Harvard. And in listening to Julia, I think what you will learn that she has a lot of is willingness to get uncomfortable. She has a lot of confidence in her ideas. And she has this fierce ability to figure shit out. So those 3 things you don't necessarily need a Harvard MBA for. And I'm not discounting the Harvard MBA because that's a big deal too. Over the last week, since announcing the new Why Not Now private group, I have been incredibly inspired because the things that are happening in this group are life-changing. People are literally taking the steps and sharing what they're doing. They're being held accountable. If you want in, just come on over and join us. Head into Facebook. You can search Why Not Now ? Private group, and you will find us quickly. Or you can just go to the URL facebook.com/groups/Why Not Now podcast. You just request to get into this group and we'll let you in right away. This is the place and the space that I've decided to really double down on when it comes to spending my time, sharing exclusive content, sharing first-time announcements, and just really, it's an intimate group where we can connect and collaborate. I am going to be going live, answering questions, and doing some live video in the next week. So make sure you hop in. We'll do an event specifically for that. But more than anything, it's about the community in this group and people helping one another. So come on in. Also, I am looking for listener stories in here. There are many. So we will be sharing some of these stories and specific situations on the podcast, of course, with your permission first. So make sure that you come and join us. Head to facebook.com/groups/Why Not Now podcast, or just search Why Not Now ? Private group in Facebook. Being able to design my own day and do it in the most efficient way is a non-negotiable for me. I'm a bit of a time management nerd, so when I find something that allows me to be more efficient and effective to get the most out of my day, I want to share it with everyone. So here's the scoop. I have a new tool in my productivity tool belt, and it's called Monday.com. My team and I have never felt more organized professionally and personally. And my to-do list is no longer the boss of me. I feel more in control because every project, initiative, date, and task is captured and organized in one place. And my team is in the loop and involved every step of the way. We are in lockstep. Monday.com is like having a brand new operating system. Everything has its own home, deadline. You can see the team members associated with the tasks, and it's color coordinated, so you can easily navigate your own task list. We all have multifaceted jobs, businesses, and lives. With Monday, you're able to keep all of these components organized in their own compartments, but you're also one click away from seeing the big picture and how they all integrate together. Creating systems and procedures within your day and business saves a lot of time. For example, my team and I have a dedicated Monday.com board for this very podcast. Did you know that there are 28 steps involved in getting one podcast ready for air? It's the same exact process every single time. And it's a system that we have put into place. So we know the various key steps are assigned to certain people, and we've mapped out the entire process from start to finish within this one board. This allows us to be streamlined. It cuts back on the amount of emails exchanged as well as the amount of meetings needed. One feature I love is that my social media content calendar is built inside of Monday.com. I finally have one that I actually use, I like, and it's embedded into my overall calendar as well. Another feature we use every single day is the Google Doc integration. You know I love a good spreadsheet. I can pull them into Monday.com and edit them right there versus having 97 tabs open on my computer, which is extremely distracting and inefficient. If how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, then I can't think of anything more important than using the time in our days wisely. Head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin to start your free trial today. That's hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. Julia, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show, and let's start with first things first. Can you tell me about a time when you had to ask yourself, why not now? And we will dissect that day, minute, hour.
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's so important to ground your journey in these particular moments, right? Because your life can change so drastically in just a moment. And I think for me, my why not now moment was the day that I decided to leave 10 years of corporate jobs to start my company, EverlyWell. And specifically like the season of life that I was in when I made that decision, where my husband a year earlier had decided to be an entrepreneur. I was in this really, really high growth career opportunity job at a public company, really felt like everything was going well, but just had this nagging feeling for years, 5 or 6 years, that I absolutely had to try to start my own company. And there was a day in 2015, a specific day, I was typical workday like any other, where I finally had this overwhelming feeling that I would regret for the rest of my life not trying. And ultimately, I knew I had the right idea and I knew I had the right inspiration. But, I'd been looking at business ideas for 5 or 6 years. And so this wasn't suddenly the one thing that moved me to leave my job and start a company. It was really getting to a point in my life where I thought, what is going to be my absolute biggest regret at the end of my life? Success or failure if I don't make this decision. And it was a really, really hard decision to make. I left a lot of people that I had a lot of responsibility to in my job. And it was not an easy choice to make. It's very hard to quit and to then start something. And so for me, that moment was just the overwhelming feeling that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't go through what was then a very difficult set of next steps to actually quit my job and start my company. But for me, that was my why not now moment.
This is so juicy. Okay, this is good because you have this carrot. Things are going well. It's not like you were looking for an out. And it was this pull to do something that you knew you'd regret not doing if you didn't. Was there something that happened or thought or situation that sparked that day, or what really caused that to be the day?
Yeah, I loved looking at new business ideas. Like in my free time, over drinks, on the weekends, I just loved thinking through business problems. I was the person who would be like, why is somebody doing something that way? There's such a better way to do something, whether it was, fast food restaurants or the travel industry. And so I had sort of always been the person making that assessment. And since business school, I knew I wanted to start a company. But it was, this health experience that I went through where, I was in this great job, but I had very poor high deductible plan healthcare. And I ended up going through a series of experiences with doctors and lab testing and paying a ton of money and getting no answers to my health issues that then kind of forced me to look this problem in the face and say, like, look, I now have this issue that I can be passionate about building a company around for 10 years, 15 years. And I can't walk away from that. And this particular issue can be world changing. It's something that I can commit my life to. And so that kind of forced me to really look in the mirror and say, I've been feeling this way. I've been, enjoying thinking about business opportunities on the side for, years. Like, am I going to actually do something about it? There are just so many great ideas out there that really have little value without execution. And it required me to really kind of have a tough conversation with myself is like, should I even continue dabbling in this stuff if I'm not willing to take the leap? And so I just decided to do it. But it was that kind of juxtaposition of saying, okay, the idea is here. Here it is. It's been 6 years and it's here. And are you going to have the courage to go through this very hard road, but to hopefully start a company?
And that's what's so cool is that you really did hold off for the right idea. You could have jumped and just for the sake of wanting. And when you left, I imagine there were a lot of confused people saying, wait, you have this opportunity, this bright road. How did you stay focused and really not let that get in your head to second guess and have the cold feet?
Yeah, and I had a lot of naysayers. So first of all, when I gave my notice, and I gave, 6 weeks notice at my prior company because I cared about the team and I really loved the work and I loved my bosses. But again, it wasn't what was going to fulfill my life's purpose. But I had, just totally surprised colleagues. Honestly, people didn't believe me. They thought that I just was not telling people what job I had taken or where I was going. And I was like, nope. Because I didn't have a business plan, which, I had frankly not done a whole bunch of planning. I had made this decision, but I really hadn't worked on the idea that much. I was so passionate that I just knew I had to take this leap. And that probably sounds surprising from someone with an MBA, but
from Harvard.
From Harvard. And so basically when people said, well, who's your team? Like, are you funded? Do you have a business plan? And the honest answer was no. So it's understandable that my colleagues kind of thought I was just making it up and that I just didn't want to say where I was going. My parents, I'm an only child. My parents were like, this is terrifying. My dad in particular, who's a lawyer and who had raised me to be very conservative financially and to really focus on saving and those kind of things, it was a really, really scary for them. And because they want to protect me, they don't want me to fail. And then my friends, I don't think people have context for what it takes to take that leap unless you've been a founder. And so I think they were supportive, but a little bit at a distance, right? Like, okay, we'll see what happens here. Sure. Sounds interesting. So I didn't have a huge support network other than really my husband, because I was a solo founder. I kind of, quit, left, and then you suddenly realize you're on your own. And that can be like a really scary moment where you feel like you're falling. And there's no parachute and no net from someone coming from, a liberal arts degree, an MBA, consulting to public company. I had always been in a really structured environment. And so I sort of had kind of everything pulled out from under me.
And for listeners, just to give you context, it is very telling that you Julia, you took the leap without having a fully mapped out business plan, because having heard you interviewed before and how smart you are, and it sounds like potentially pretty analytical, you clearly just knew. And so you're going to figure it out. And that's big, I think, because, if we reverse engineer personality types, we don't always peg them right. Kenny Tomlin, who we both know, that's been on this podcast as well, he shares the same thing, as he's very systematic and he's extremely intelligent, but he also, when he knows. And so that just speaks volumes. I think, too, you weren't just starting a company that had existed before. This was innovating an entire industry. So this was a big undertaking. Can you talk a little bit about your company, EverlyWell, but also what it was like to be paving a path that didn't exist yet, especially without knowledge of that specific industry, although you did have your Harvard MBA in your back pocket, so that had to have helped. But yeah, just the very first, okay, I'm on my own now, and that lonely feeling that you mentioned. What was that like, and how did it all go?
Yeah, and so for context, EverlyWell is setting out to transform lab testing for you, for me, basically for every American. And so our goal is to make lab testing like Tylenol, which is it's accessible, it's affordable. You can buy it where you live and work or online, and you get really detailed, useful results that are not just managed through egregious pricing from lack of insurance coverage, not just managed through your physicians, and you're actually able to use meaningful lab tests, from hormone testing to food sensitivity to STD testing in your everyday life. And, again, I had this idea because I went through a normal health process to identify a hormone imbalance and ended up with $2,500 in bills. And shockingly, that's pretty much the standard experience now. 80% of people are on high deductible plans, and whether or not you meet your deductible is basically not the question. People don't meet it, or they pay out of pocket, and they're looking for better, seamless experiences in healthcare and consumer-driven experiences. And so 3 years ago, that is what I set out to start. Now, to your point, I had zero healthcare experience, and talk about an industry where having no experience is potentially particularly detrimental in starting a company. And I will continue to, and at the time made an argument that I felt like I had an advantage. And I felt I had an advantage because I was building a consumer product. And I felt that I could hire the people that I needed that were regulatory experts and diagnostics experts and medical experts. But I had the consumer perspective, and my job was to build an incredible end-to-end consumer experience. But here's what day one looks like. My husband and I sold our house. He was bootstrapping his startup and traveling 5 days a week. I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment calling labs, trying to get them to talk to some random person at the time out of Dallas who has no medical background, who's starting some company that's going to sell lab testing to people in kits and get them to actually draw their own blood and send it in.
Did you know at the time when you were making these calls, if policy-wise, you had to have known that this was possible to make this big of a leap? But I imagine rules and regulations, did you already know that it was completely doable?
I knew enough to know that we could operate in almost every state. And I knew there was a very complex framework we were going to have to follow because we needed to follow both direct-to-consumer lab testing regulation, which is regulated by state. We needed to ensure our labs were following federal regulation around lab testing, which is set by CMS. And then we needed to ensure that we were following the right protocols in not diagnosing via our results, but still having very customized and clinically relevant information. So we were balancing a whole host of things. I had done enough research to know that it was possible and to know that legislation was changing, especially because of 23andMe and think about it, 10 years ago, nobody would have ever spit in a tube and put it in the mail. And there was so much changing, regardless of the administration in place. There had been so much of a movement towards consumer enablement and consumer empowerment around healthcare that I just knew that legislation would continue to empower people to be able to buy these tests. So I had done my homework there. But I mean, look, I pretty early on had to get a lot of lawyers on board, and it wasn't cheap, right? There were certain areas where I was really unwilling to compromise with medical director hires, products, lawyers, et cetera, lab testing, where we had to be really, really buttoned up. So I did know that piece. I think what I didn't know, and what I did zero market testing on, is who would buy this product. I designed the product for women from 30 to 40 who were busy, whether they were moms, professional women, et cetera. I had talked to my friends. I had talked to my parents, and I felt like I had enough anecdotal data to make a market story there. And I looked at trends in healthcare, and I looked at healthcare costs, and I thought, we can massively disrupt this market, and we can disrupt how people experience it. We can disrupt the cost, and we can make it technology enabled. And frankly, the bar was so low. Think about your LabCorp or your Quest experience. Yes, they have a brand, but it is the brand of the DMV. I was if we can make this better for people, I mean, really 20% better, that is radical improvement. And I would go so far as to say we've totally transformed how people can go through testing. And so I just felt like this was an industry a lot of people didn't want to touch because it's not glamorous, it's not sexy, but it informs 85% of diagnoses in this country, lab testing. And so to me, it was such an obvious untouched market, and one where I felt my consumer angle could be coupled with labs that already are experts in how to do this testing and could really create something transformational. And when you think about where you're going to spend your life and you think about what are really the drivers of your life decisions, you maybe have 10 big decisions to make over the course of your life. How you want to build your family, or if you do or don't, who you want to be with, what career you want to choose, those kinds of things. And for me, I wasn't going to start a company that was the 10th company in some vertical that was solving a marginal problem. I was going to start a company that, if it works, will literally transform how every American thinks about lab testing. And it may not work. I believe it will. But at least I'm solving a huge problem, because if I'm going to work this hard, it might as well be for something that's big.
Well, so far it is working. And I have purchased a test actually from your website. And it was an interesting process because I knew, I saw your Shark Tank show, and I saw it when it aired, which was awesome. And by the way, I mean, even the kudos they gave you were so dialed in and prepared. And I, of course, thought, wow, that's so innovative. And I didn't really think about its application to my life and what I would need. And then I wanted to go experience the user experience online. And I was looking at your various tests, and I didn't realize how many you had. But also, I specifically ended up buying the ovarian reserve test. Mm-hmm. And as someone who just turned 39, who has had 2 miscarriages, and I've talked about this on the show before, it's probably the only time I've gotten that personal, but I think it's an important topic. I have asked my physicians before for that test, and in one state, when I lived in a different state, maybe more progressive, they were willing to do it. But currently, they just wouldn't. You've democratized access and people's ability to make their own decisions. And it's, from a medical standpoint, I mean, that's huge. I don't take that lightly at all. It's amazing. And I was so excited to see that that was an option. And you have all these other options, of course, from stress and thyroid and all the vitamins. And when we start to think about healthcare differently and the way you've innovated, the sky has to just be, the limit. So let's talk about innovation for a second, because if there's anyone that's probably come against, some major adversity, it would be you in this process. What are some of the big general takeaways that you might be able to provide for listeners who are looking to pave a path that doesn't yet exist? Any kind of ahas that really roll up as an umbrella kind of takeaway?
Yeah, I think the first and potentially the most important takeaway for innovation is that if everybody thought it was a good idea, or frankly, even if most people thought it was a good idea, it would already be done. Innovation inherently is going to meet a lot of naysayers and a lot of criticism. And learning how to filter criticism and what criticism is important to take into account and what's important to ignore entirely, I think is really, you have to have a core if you're looking at creating a new market or really creating real innovation around how to differentiate the two. Because I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have started this company if I listened, frankly, to anyone. Early stage when I was pitching to venture capitalists, it was, well, there's no market here because you have no competition. Now, 2 years later, the question is always, well, how are you going to defend because this market is so hot? And I say, well, I'm sure glad that's the question now and it's not the other one, right? And so I think it's really important to know what you're building, know who you're building it for and who the customer is, and be able to ignore everything else. And look, can that go too far? Of course. Can you have some totally wacky idea where the timing is off, the adoption just isn't there? But I also knew that we started to have real traction. And so I had sort of this back pocket of data. And, I also said, look, I can figure out pretty quickly if this is going to work, at least to some degree. And so I think that it's important to kind of say, I'm going to let go of all the criticism. I'm going to know what I need to see to keep going and what I think the important data points are. And then I'm going to continue moving forward. And you have to have a really strong sense of self as well, because as a founder, your own identity is often, and not necessarily healthfully, but it's often tied into the company. And so if you aren't able to separate and say, look, I don't care what people say, I'm going to continue forward. And I'm also going to be confident in myself and my ability to innovate. I think those are really the key pieces that as you move forward in whatever space, you need to have a really honest assessment and be able to take that step back and to not take it personally. Because we'd never be here. I mean, everybody's going to criticize or else it would have been done before.
Such a good point. Also, the fact what you mentioned about having zero experience and those fresh eyes was a huge upside for you too. That matched with your willingness to just not be swayed or listen to the arguments around you because, like you said, they changed. They went from total, one spectrum to the other of there's no competition, there's no industry to, well, what are you going to do now? There's too much. And it's always going to be something. So that's really interesting that you said I wouldn't be here if I listened to anyone. I mean, that's a big statement and so inspiring, to stick with it too, of what you believe. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us. Let's talk about becoming a first-time entrepreneur. I mean, so you started, and I imagine, did you wear many hats and have to figure out where to spend your time and building a culture and hiring people to do things that you don't know how to do or know about necessarily? What's one of the biggest misconceptions about becoming an entrepreneur in your mind?
Oh, I love talking about kind of the very early days. One, because it's I think so crazy that we're already, frankly, far beyond the very early days, and I miss them. I mean, it's been fun to reflect on them, I think, and really, distill what the key takeaways were for me and if it can be helpful for others. So, I think for me, probably the most surprising or maybe the biggest misconception is that you have to say no all the time. And even in the early days, you don't own the ability to do everything. So for example, I had an outsourced development team after I raised a little bit of capital that was building a super MVP prototype, right, of the site to try to then go raise more money. And while that was being done, there was only so much that I, as founder, could do. So I took a lot of outside meetings. I had all kinds of inbound inquiries for coffee, for consulting, for, to consult for the company, et cetera. And reflecting on my first year, I think I wasted about 75% of my time. And I put it that high because I felt like everyone else knew better or knew more than I did about how to be a founder and an entrepreneur. So if people in the quote unquote entrepreneurial ecosystem were reaching out to me, one, I felt guilty saying no. And two, I felt like I didn't know as much as they did. And I really readdressed how I was spending my time after the first year. And I actually now take 0 outside meetings unless they contribute to company goals. And I am very, very laser focused in not feeling guilty about choosing to spend my time on what's going to make the company successful. And I don't know if that is a challenge more with female founders or not. I found it to be a particular challenge with me to say no, but I really quickly learned that I, in fact, am the only person who knows how to spend my time best. Nobody else who's in the entrepreneurial community knows more or is better than you at being a founder. And you really have to drive this path for yourself. It was the first time in my life that I didn't have a boss. At that time, I didn't even really have a board. And so it was freeing in some ways, but in other ways, I still felt like I had to be accountable or sort of perform for other people. And it took me a year to really get out of that mindset and to think about centering myself around what are the things that I need to do to make the company successful and to be unapologetic, completely unapologetic about doing anything else.
What I'm hearing kind of an undertone of is, and something I know I've experienced personally, is we tend to seek that outside advice when we're getting started. Yet, if you look at your product, your brand, and industry, and lack of innovation in the healthcare industry, there really was no one that had done this before. So even in your case, like there really wasn't a roadmap or a blueprint that you could talk to someone about because you were building it. So that's really interesting too. And when it came to your very first hire, who was that? What position?
So unsurprisingly, my very first hire was a medical director. I sort of took each step. So if you can't, in my mind, if I thought too far ahead, I would get overwhelmed because there were just so many things that had to be done, right, to build traction and to raise money, et cetera. And I thought, okay, what is the one next step that I need to take care of as soon as possible to get to the next room and to open that door? And then I'm going to walk through it. And then I'm going to figure out what is the only thing that needs to be done to open the next door. So right after I incorporated the company, I went out and raised a small amount of angel funding from a great angel investor to hire a medical officer and to hire a technology firm. And so I had that medical officer on board within 4 weeks. And I hit a lot of barriers in trying to actually find a group of people to recruit from. And I figured out after hitting like 2 weeks of brick walls, because I was talking to doctors who actually wanted to practice medicine, that I needed to find all the doctors who wanted to consult and be in business and not practice anymore. And so when I had that mindset shift, it was really easy to find, several hundred top candidates that do a lot of startup consulting in the medical field. And I was able to recruit a really great medical director, and he was with us for about 2 years. And so that was a major accomplishment for me because, as I mentioned, I believe that if you do the same thing too many times and you continue to hit a brick wall, you absolutely have to stop doing that and find a way to go around the wall. So I was calling all these labs, as I said, and they would not respond to me. They didn't want anything to do with me. Well, as soon as I hired my medical director, sure enough, they would respond to him because he was a doctor and because their typical revenue came from physicians. So it was an easy way to kind of get around the problem and using just problem solving and saying, okay, instead of being sensitive because I'm not getting calls back, like what do I need to do to think about this from the other side of the table to get my first customers in the door as lab partners? And so that hire really enabled me to walk through the next step, which was being able to get these lab contracts.
The one next step. That's, I imagine, something that is going to help a lot of people. And when you think about being overwhelmed I went back and rewatched your Shark Tank episode, and most of the sharks were like, this is just too big of a undertaking. You're going to need tens of millions of dollars. This is a gigantic task. And several of them were out. but you still don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed. And you did obviously get a deal with Lori, which is awesome. But when it comes to just knowing that this is in front of you, and are there any tips and tricks other than just the one next thing that you do to not allow that to bring you down when you get that kind of feedback from these experts?
Yeah, I think that when you think about getting overwhelmed or allowing stress or the size of the problem to get the best of you, I think it is just so important to be able to think about controlling the moment. And there are really a handful of moments in the course of a startup that make or break it. And I was a competitive athlete. I was an equestrian. I was certainly not Nastia, but was a competitive equestrian for several decades. And I had to learn to be very calm and collected and to keep a cool head at really critical inflection points. One, because I couldn't really predict or control what an animal is going to do. Mm-hmm. And two, because you train for years and years and years, and you have these very short periods of time to compete where you really have to seize the opportunity. And so I think that for me, I turned that into a motivation. And actually, one of our core values at the company is being what we call energized by challenges. I mean, each one of us here wakes up every day and there's like the highest mountain to climb 20 times over. Mm. You can either wake up every day and say, that is so exciting and I can't wait to figure out how to solve that problem for customers. Or you can be really sort of negative, pessimistic, and overwhelmed by that and say, man, that problem is just too big. And I really believe that this isn't just innate either. You aren't one person or the other. It's about positioning your mindset to say, I don't want to be in my life spending time doing anything other than solving big problems. That is the best use of my time. And that is, I can do 1,000 things with my time every day of the week. I want to spend it solving the biggest problems in the world because what else could be more important? And that to me is a mindset shift that enables you to sort of take control of the opportunity rather than being overwhelmed or overcome by the size of the opportunity. Because you're right, it can very easily slip into this is just too much and there's too many pieces and too many challenges. And so it's about really wrangling that in the opposite direction.
So many amazing takeaways from listening to you. And do you have a mentor? Do you have someone who's been guiding you through this?
I do. I have actually had a strategic advisor, an executive coach who is paid and who is a shareholder in the company since 4 months after I started the company. And she has been instrumental, I think, to giving me a little more context around what do you see with other startups and how do you have these rapid transitions from founder to CEO. And I call her a mentor because she's there, yes, to sort of serve as a sounding board for me, but she also had founded a company, a very successful, high-scaling, high-growth startup, lots of venture money, et cetera. And I think has been a great person to sort of be a Sherpa on the path. Would I have learned all of this and figured it out? Probably. Would I have made probably 20 more mistakes than I have? I'm sure I would have. And so being able to learn quickly in a startup and iterate quickly and quickly adjust your path is probably one of the biggest keys to success. And I feel like she has helped me create the fastest changes and sort of the fastest learning cycle that I could have. And so that's been really helpful. And I would really recommend it. I mean, it is a hard path and you're so blind ahead when you haven't done this before. And that's why first-time founders often fail because they have to go through that learning experience first and then apply all those lessons learned. And my goal is to surround myself with people, both on my team and as mentors and advisors, who can help me uncover some of those blind spots a little more quickly so that I can avoid some of those pitfalls.
So wise. And you mentioned she is also a coach. So this is kind of an interesting topic that I've been thinking about lately. The difference between a mentor and a coach. Would you say that she started as a coach, and maybe she still is, but that's usually someone that you pay, and evolved into becoming your mentor?
Absolutely. And I think for me, coming out of an environment where I either always had a boss that I was delivering for, or I had a coach when I was an equestrian, I'm used to being motivated and driven by other people. And initially that was helpful for me to drive accountability, but now I have 55 employees, I have a board, I have a cap table with a number of investors. I'm accountable every day to our customers, to our employees, and to my investors. And so certainly that's what I wake up and think about every day. But in the early days, having someone to sort of help you be more of a coach, and then I think that's why it's evolved now into a mentor relationship. But, early on, it's just me. There's a million things I can do. Having a little stronger guidance, I think, was really helpful.
Changing gears for just a minute here, time management. So it sounds like you learned a lot in the first year and have applied the lessons, but any tactical kind of tangible tips and tricks when it comes to managing your time?
I like to look at managing my time with also the urgency and the pace of work and the culture that we create at EverlyWell. So we move super fast. And in order to set the tone of moving super fast, making decisions, getting things done, moving at the pace that we need to move, I have to drive that from the top, from an accountability standpoint. So I use the 2-minute rule on email. I am always managing to an inbox that is generally less than 15 emails. And if it can be handled in 2 minutes or less, I clear it right then. I expect less than a 24-hour response time from my team, and they generally get same-day responses to any inquiry from me. And if I'm not able to help them move their work forward, then they can't achieve their goals for the company. So to me, the tone kind of starts at the top. And I've always been a super, super fast-paced person. It's something now that we actually recruit for because it's the culture of the company, is just being able to, kind of operate at this quick pace and accomplishing goals quickly. In terms of just broader time management, part of this has been a self-acceptance for me around being willing and okay with letting go of the areas of my life that are just not going to be manageable today. That's not meaning that they won't be part of my life or a big focus in the future. But right now, and for the past 3 years and looking forward, I don't have a huge social life. I have a really tight-knit, close group of friends. I have, my husband, and I have my dogs, and I have a family, and I'm okay with that. I used to have a lot of volunteer and extracurricular activities. At some point, that will be an investment for me again. But I have said, I can only do maybe 2 things well. And right now, this company is the most important thing to me other than my family. And I'm comfortable with that choice, and I'm open about it. And I'm not, again, not apologetic about it. And I think that has really helped because it's freed me to be able to allocate my time and to be comfortable with that and not constantly feel guilty all the time about all the things that I can't do. I can't, be on Pinterest creating all these crafts from scratch for somebody's birthday party. It's not something that I would love to do that, frankly, but it created too much guilt in my life. And I had to really simplify and cut back and say, this is important to me now. I want to achieve these goals, and this is what it's going to take.
What's one lesson you've had to learn over and over?
I know probably a lot of people have said this, but I'm saying it because it's true. So I'm okay saying it again. Hiring and firing is the lesson that I never want to continue learning. I'm always learning more about the right fit on the team and making sure that, we're doing a lot of self-reflection, both me and the company, when a hire doesn't work out, but also, hiring slow and firing fast. When someone's not working out, to be respectful of them, as well as make sure that the company can succeed, just being upfront about it and being candid and making sure that you're handling it in the right way. I found that when people aren't delivering or doing a good job and they know they're not meeting expectations, they're not fulfilled or happy either. And part of my goal is that people are not only really fulfilled and happy at EverlyWell and really fulfilled with the work that they're doing, but that if EverlyWell is not the right place, that they should go on and find a different place to be fulfilled. And I view that as kind of a whole person concept. And I think that it's important to us that we treat people with respect. And sometimes that involves going your separate ways. But that is a lesson I have continued to have to learn. I'm still learning it, and I'll continue to. I mean, it's part of the reality of any company, but it's a hard one. It's never easy.
It's not. And that's what's interesting. And I do various talks for corporate companies and talking about this why not now mentality. That's one of the biggest things I hear is that their why not now idea is to finally let someone go or finally add that position. And it seems like we wait too long to hire, and oftentimes we wait too long to fire. And it's just such an interesting dynamic because that's the energy of your culture too. And wow. So are you up for a couple of rapid fire questions?
Yes.
Okay. What's your all-time favorite book?
All-time favorite book, I think it has to be The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And like all time's probably extreme because that's probably, I have to think about all time for a while. But to me, that's the book that has impacted my last 5 years or so the most, and prepared me for how hard this was going to be.
Great recommendation for people who are listening that are getting ready to venture off on their own. And what keeps you up at night, Julia?
What keeps me up at night is really just the sheer weight of knowing that today I have 55 employees and their livelihoods, and making sure that, the decisions can't come as quickly or as frankly as flippantly as they used to when there weren't real jobs on the line for making the wrong call. And so thinking through how do you not be crippled by that fear, and how do you still make the right decisions for a startup, but it's a totally different season of the company, and having to balance those things is new for me, and it definitely keeps me up.
Can imagine. Can you tell me about a time when you found yourself in an oh shit moment and how you got out of it?
Oh, I love this question. Sure. So when I was applying to Shark Tank, they had actually found me through a competition called TechCrunch Battlefield, which is sort of the premier startup pitch competition. It's actually on this parody show Silicon Valley, if you're familiar with that, from season 1. And we had applied and had been selected as a Battlefield participant to pitch back in 2016, right around our launch. And I went up there and I had to pitch to like 30,000 people live. There was like 5 demo switches. It was very complicated. And they had a team at TechCrunch managing the technology. And they switched to multiple other people's presentations during my live pitch. And I was on a 6-minute timer countdown that had been perfectly timed out, and the pitch had been memorized. And of course, nobody in the audience knows that somebody else is running the slides, right? They think it's me and my team. And I'm certainly not going to say, well, it's not our fault. And nor do I have time to say, please give me time back on the clock. And then I also had to not look flustered, despite the fact that I kept saying, that's not our presentation, that's the wrong slide, that's the wrong demo. And it happened 2 or 3 times. So for me, I really, in a highly stressful situation, had to, 1, get back on track, and 2, I realized in the moment that I should not act or look annoyed. Because I knew that if I did that, there were very few women pitching, it had to be very smiley, all the things that you hear for kind of women presentation style. And I knew that that would sort of get screen grabbed and that would have a negative impression. And so I basically just made a joke about it and moved on, and we ended up making the finals. And it's out there. I mean, the video's out there to see. But because I kept my cool and I think didn't act annoyed, I think it was something that I actually navigated, despite the fact that I couldn't control the circumstances at all. And it was, frankly, potentially at the time, it could have been the biggest moment in the company's life ever. And that was definitely something I was proud in the moment of how I handled that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there were people just monitoring how you were handling it. And that could have spoke volumes incremental of what you were actually presenting as well, because we're humans and we're relatable and we all think, well, what would I do in that situation? So that's such a good story. Wow. Good oh shit moment. Pirates or ninjas, Julia? Who's tougher and why?
Oh, I think ninjas. Because I think about martial arts and a lot of the mental discipline required and the mental strategy in that style of fighting. And so for that reason, I think that ninjas are tougher.
And the final question, What advice would you give to your younger self?
I think the advice I would give to my younger self is I've now experienced what it's like to a large degree not care what other people think about you, and to realize almost no one cares about you as much as you care about yourself. And that, I think, would have been really freeing for me, like when I was a teenager in my early 20s in those really kind of stressful developmental years. And I'm really quite proud of it. I'm quite proud of where I am now. And I think that it took this leap and this journey to build that, because there was no other path. If I didn't build that, I think the company would have failed. So that's the advice that I would give any younger woman, or someone who maybe needs that boost of confidence.
That is solid for sure. And likewise, I can imagine the difference, if I had been able to start practicing and learning that earlier too. Well, this has been gold. I have so many notes here.
Such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise. And you have so much value to offer. This is like getting a little mini MBA in entrepreneurship listening to you. So thank you so much for your time. And I know how busy you are. And I look forward to following your journey and the EverlyWell journey.
Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time, and until then, why not now?